Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprint 193 review. This was a normal 2-week sprint. Let's get started. I'll start with the overview. Melody will do the UI, Adam on providers, Joe on the platform, and Keenan on the API. This sprint, we had 86 PRs merged with 96 open. It was a pretty typical sprint. And as you can see, there was a lot of bug fixes, but also a lot of features coming in. We're starting to lock down the Oparin release as far as features go, and then we'll be focusing on bug fixes after this. And over to Melody with the UI.
Thanks, Jason. So in this sprint, 18 bugs got merged into the UI Classic repo, out of which 6 were bugs, 8 were enhancements, 2 were some technical depth, and the final 2 fall into miscellaneous categories. And I can go ahead and explain them in the following slides. So for our first bug here, we had an undefined error alert that was displayed when delete all was clicked for an empty task table. Gilbert fixed this bug by adding a nil check in the task controller. Next slide. For this issue as well, Gilbert also fixed a typo on a test string, which occurred as part of converting the Service Explorers page. And here Gilbert also fixed an issue with the button group form where group index value was not being submitted to the API, causing issues with the toolbar when the toolbar tried to load in the custom buttons. Here, there was an undefined method for description in the storage manager's memory summary page. So Jay set the region label directly to the provider region value to remove the dependency on defining a quote unquote description instance method to fix this issue. For this one, there was a bug in the catalog item buttons group form. The unassigned button list in the dual select field was empty due to the form not loading in the button list correctly. So once Gilbert did some code refactoring and added a check to include the service template, the issue was fixed. Here, when invalid data was sent to the heat map chart graph, for instance, due to a connection problem in the backend, a broken chart is rendered instead of an empty chart. This is because the data is not null, but is invalid. So the Auto SDE team fixed this by performing a code refactoring. Moving on to enhancements, here there were translated texts that were being rendered outside of their designated boundaries. This happened with the dual list selects box in navbar and model boxes. And so I made the appropriate CSS changes to fix this issue. Here, Adam added a public network option to the environment tab, and dependent PRs were also made in core and the Google provider repo. For here, I made some changes to translate the strings within cloud databases, networks, and security groups, textual summary pages. Here, Adam made some changes to check if the provisioner type is clone. Then he set the request type to clone to VM or clone to template based on the source object being cloned. As you can see, the title of the page is changed accordingly. Here, the Auto SDE team added a timeline feature for physical storage under the configuration select option. Dependent PRs were made in core, schema, and Auto SDE provider repos. For this one, I added the logic to add, edit, and delete the cloud databases under the configuration select option, and dependent PRs were made in core and Azure provider repos. Here, Nassar added the ability to choose AWX catalog items and select job templates to be used in service provisioning. 2 fields were made active by this by including additional checks for service AWX record types. Here for the final 2 technical depth bugs, Jay found a stray by bug in the VM actions ownership RB file and removed it. And Gilbert removed a few unused actions for generic object definition lists. That's it. Thank you.
All right. So for providers this sprint, as Melody mentioned, we can now see events for physical storages. So Tony made changes to core, which link up physical storages and the event handler to be able to link events to the physical storages record, which allowed us to show them on the UI. We added a utility to load provider info and settings from the database and write them to a child processes standard in pipe, which allows us to unblock work in the future to run either non-Rails workers or just workers in general without having to have access to the database. This is part of some long-term work to reduce the memory usage of workers. Nasser this sprint completed the AWX and Ansible Tower split. So the AWX provider is now the parent provider for Ansible Tower, and you'll be able to pick either AWX or Ansible Tower from the dropdown when adding a automation manager. You can check out this new provider at the URL here. Next slide. AutoSD updated the arguments to create a storage system. There are some keys which are no longer supported by the SDK, and so they dropped those from keys being passed to the API. They also fixed some symbol keys being passed down for the edit cloud volume form. And they also added support for service catalog ordering of cloud volumes. This is the first PR and a few PRs. Next ones will be adding the actual dialogues to be able to order this. So hopefully that'll land in the coming sprint. For Azure, we fixed a targeted refresh bug that was causing issues during provisioning, where the new VM that got created wasn't being picked up properly because the EMS ref that we're passing in to try to find in the database was coming in as a hash as opposed to just a standard string, which is causing a SQL query failure. The result was that you had to do manual refresh in order to get the Azure provisioning to be unstuck. So that is fixed in this sprint. For Google, as Melody mentioned, we now have an option to expose an instance to external NAT or not. Previously, this was just defaulted to true, or not even defaulted, the only option was true. Community user reported that they have some policies on their project that prevent their instances from being exposed to the internet. And so this was causing them failures when they were doing provisioning. So we made this an option so they can deselect exposing newly provisioned instances to the internet. Next slide. Bunch of work on Power VS this sprint. Jay updated the SDK version to pick up new methods and options for the Power SDK. Iskandar updated the image import form on Power VS to allow you to filter the available storage disk types based on the destination provider that you selected. They also fixed an inventory refresh failure when volumes that were referenced from VMs were missing. So this was causing refresh failures when we tried to get info about each of the disks on a VM, and some of them were coming back as 404. So in this case, we just skip past them and move on. And then John updated image import form to allow you to select a cloud object storage provider during the image import. For Power VC, Iskandar also did essentially the same change that he did for Power VS, which is filtering down the available cloud volume types when you pick a destination provider. Next slide. And finally, Nasser also completed Overt and Rev provider split. So Overt is now the parent provider for the Red Hat infrastructure provider. Previously, we had Red Hat as the class name in an Overt plugin, which was kind of an interesting mix. Overt's the upstream project for Rev. So now we have a separate Overt plugin and Overt class names, and the Red Hat virtualization provider plugin has the old Red Hat names. This allowed us to be able to do this without having to do any schema migrations. But in the future, we would like to migrate these class names out so that the class names in the plugin match the plugin name. And that's it for providers. Over to Joe.
Okay, so for enhancements, Frank updated the translations for various locales based upon the template that was provided for July 29th. Brandon next enhanced the code base by removing a patch for a no longer used Memcache client. Adam removed support for automatically initializing the database on appliances, as it made it very complicated to do the configurations in multiple appliance region configurations. Keenan fixed an issue in RBAC where we were trying to preload non-associations from virtual attributes. This was failing on Rails 6.1 while it was silently ignored in Rails 6.0. So he fixed this to work with both. Tony added the ability for physical storages to display events. Next slide. For bugs, Keenan fixed an issue with Rails 6.1 where some of our virtual attributes were failing to generate SQL. Next, Tony fixed an issue on the physical storages monitoring page, so it can now show policy events in addition to the already shown event streams. Jason fixed an issue where builds were failed on Podman environments that weren't S390X. And then Brandon fixed several bug enhancements found while he was upgrading to the operator SDK 1X. Next, to the
Cool. Okay, so big changes for the API. Sorry for the sarcasm. So Islander added cloud volume type as a subtype on cloud volumes for providers. I didn't mention Adam had fixed some bugs around supports. I thought that was going to come out in the core, but sorry. Thanks, Adam. You probably fixed a bug that I introduced. On to the next slide.
And that's it for the Sprint 193 review. The next review is Sprint 194 on August 24th at the regular place and time. And I want to thank all the presenters today. Thank all the people from the community, both submitting fixes and finding issues. And we'll see you on the next Sprint review. Thanks, everyone.